Hello everyone, welcome to our channel of meetings assistance for Jehovah's Witnesses. I hope you are all doing well. In this video, we are going to prepare for the book study, Complete Testimony, for the week of March 10th to 16th. This week we will study chapter 23, paragraphs 16 to 19, and the box. So, let's get started. Questions 16 and 17, Part A. What happened when Paul started speaking before the Sanhedrin? When Paul began to speak before the Sanhedrin, he claimed that he had a clean conscience before God. However, upon saying this, the high priest Ananias ordered that he be struck in the mouth, which demonstrated prejudice and a lack of impartiality, as he hadn't even listened to what Paul had to say. Additional comments. The blow Paul received shows an act of injustice, as the principle of listening to a person before judging them was violated, something fundamental in the law of Moses. Ananias did not allow Paul to defend his position, reflecting an authoritarian attitude that was not objective. This incident also illustrates how religious authority, at times, can be influenced by personal prejudices, ignoring divine justice. Paul, being struck for expressing his sincerity, lived through an example of how authority figures can act wrongly, even when they are at the head of a religious community. Questions 16 and 17, Part B. How did Paul show humility after being struck? After being struck, Paul showed humility by recognizing that he had spoken against the high priest without knowing who he was. Instead of insisting on his mistake, he apologized, citing the command not to insult the leaders of the people, as established in Exodus 22:28. Additional comments. Paul's response is a clear example of humility and respect for authority. Although he had been unjustly struck, he immediately corrected himself, showing that respect for divine law is more important than personal pride. This behavior highlights the importance of recognizing personal failings, even when one is not the one who has committed the injustice. Paul shows that, even in times of persecution, humility and respect for authorities established by God should prevail. By not defending his accusation with anger but rather with an apology in reference to Scripture, he models a godly conduct that reflects the principles of the gospel, especially the respect for God's law. Question 18. Why did Paul say he was a Pharisee, and how can we imitate him in preaching? Paul said he was a Pharisee because he came from a family of Pharisees, and that was the religious sect he belonged to before converting to Christianity. By mentioning this, he highlighted a common point with the members of the Sanhedrin, who were mostly Pharisees. This allowed him to establish a connection with them, despite doctrinal differences, particularly about the resurrection, which he understood differently from the Pharisees. Additional comments. Paul used his identity as a Pharisee to create a connection point with his listeners. By acknowledging his previous beliefs, he showed a preaching strategy that seeks to highlight common ground rather than emphasize differences. This approach is useful for establishing dialogue and opening the door to discuss deeper topics, such as the resurrection, in a way that allowed his message to be heard without prejudice. Paul's approach shows us how we can use common points in preaching to connect with people of different beliefs. For example, when talking to people who believe in God, even though they may have a different understanding of who God is, we can find common ground and, from there, present our biblical perspective in a respectful manner. This method of connecting before correcting facilitates understanding and openness to new concepts. Question 19. Why did the members of the Sanhedrin end up arguing? The members of the Sanhedrin ended up arguing because Paul, by mentioning the possibility that an angel or a spirit had spoken to him, provoked a strong disagreement between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees, who believed in angels and the resurrection, began to defend Paul, while the Sadducees, who rejected these beliefs, opposed him vigorously. This caused a great dispute that ended with the military commander intervening to protect Paul. Additional comments. The dispute between the Pharisees and Sadducees shows how doctrinal differences can create divisions within a religious community. Although both groups were part of the same council, their differing beliefs on issues like angels and the resurrection caused unity to quickly crumble. This highlights the importance of being aware of underlying beliefs when interacting with different groups, as they can create conflicts even within the same context. The intervention of the military commander to save Paul shows how Paul's faith, and the controversy it generated, went beyond what a single religious group could resolve. Through his bravery and persuasion, Paul caused a division that exposed the internal tensions of the Sanhedrin, allowing him time and protection. This underscores how, sometimes, internal conflicts can be used to further God's plans. Comments from the box on the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Differences in beliefs. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were two very important religious groups in Jesus' time, but they had very different beliefs. The Pharisees followed many traditions and rules, in addition to the law of Moses, and wanted everyone to follow them. In contrast, the Sadducees only followed the law of Moses and were not as interested in traditions. Despite their differences, both groups were opposed to Jesus. The influence of the Sadducees and Pharisees. The Sadducees, who were more conservative, had a close relationship with the priests and often only persuaded wealthy people. Meanwhile, the Pharisees had more influence over the common people, but their rules and teachings were sometimes too difficult to follow, which made many people feel overwhelmed. The Pharisees also believed that after death, people would receive punishment or reward based on their life. Well, these have been the practical answers for this week's congregation book study. I hope it is very helpful to you, my dear brothers and sisters. I send you a big hug, and may Jehovah always bless and protect you.